So when Jeb Bush threw his hat in the ring for president back in 2016, he came with something a lot of other candidates didn't have: a massive executive record. We're talking 2 full terms as the governor of Florida. What we're going to do today is really break down his entire policy platform from that campaign, looking at his record and what he proposed on, well, pretty much everything from the economy to foreign policy. Let's dive in. And honestly, you can't get a better introduction to his whole fiscal philosophy than this quote right here. As governor, he picked up the nickname Vito Corleone, yeah, little nod to the Godfather, because he was just so aggressive with that veto pen, slashing government spending left and right. This really became a huge part of his identity as a fiscal conservative. All right, so here's the game plan for this explainer. We're going to start with his time as governor of Florida, then we'll get into his stances on some key social issues. After that, we'll look at his national platform, immigration and foreign policy, then do a deep dive into his pretty detailed plans for entitlements, and we'll wrap it all up with a big summary of his entire platform. Okay, so let's kick things off right where he really made his name, the governor's mansion down in Tallahassee. His 2 terms there were really defined by a pretty sweeping and, you could say, often controversial agenda of conservative reforms. This gives us a really great snapshot of that agenda. I mean, first off, his fiscal conservatism was front and center. He vetoed over $2.3 billion in spending. He also totally reshaped Florida's education system, bringing in the country's first statewide school voucher programs, the ones that let parents use public money for private schools, and that A to F grading system for public schools. He also ended affirmative action in state hiring and university admissions, bringing in his One Florida plan instead. And then on crime, he signed the very controversial Stand Your Ground law and was a big proponent of tough, mandatory minimum sentences. All right, so how did all that stuff he did in Florida play out on the national stage? Well, his positions on social issues are particularly interesting, because while he was rock solid on some things, like abortion, his views on other issues, like LGBTQ rights, for example, well, they definitely showed a pretty clear evolution over the years. When it came to abortion, Bush was consistently pro-life, no ambiguity there. He was a backer of the Pain-Capable Unborn Child Protection Act, which aimed to ban most abortions after 20 weeks. And back when he was governor, he took steps to defund groups like Planned Parenthood in Florida. But here is where you see a really fascinating evolution. Check out the timeline here. In 1994, his language was incredibly harsh. He wrote that protections for gay and lesbian people were like elevating sodomy. But fast forward to 2015, right as he's gearing up for his presidential run, and his tone had changed a lot. He was calling for respect for same-sex commitments, even while he said he personally believed in traditional marriage. It's a huge shift in tone, right? Okay, so we've covered domestic stuff. Let's pivot now to the national and, well, the global stage. His positions on immigration and foreign policy were absolutely central to his campaign. And just like with some social issues, we saw some notable shifts as he got ready for that White House bid. And this is a really big one, a huge shift in his immigration platform that got a lot of attention. See, in his book from 2013, he actually supported a path to citizenship for undocumented residents. But then, just 2 years later, with the Republican primary really starting to heat up, he changed that position. He then supported a path to legal status only and made it very clear he was ruling out citizenship. A lot of people saw that as a direct response to a more conservative primary electorate. This quote pretty much says it all, doesn't it? Putin is a bully. Short, simple, and it perfectly captures the kind of assertive, more confrontational American foreign policy he was going for, especially when it came to Russia. And, his actual proposals really backed up that tough talk. He was calling to completely cancel the Obama administration's nuclear deal with Iran. He wanted to strengthen the alliance with Israel, and to counter Russia, he said we should even consider putting U.S. troops in nearby countries. And for fighting ISIS, his idea was to embed American trainers right there with Iraqi forces on the ground. Okay, let's get into what might be the most detailed and maybe the most ambitious part of his platform. We're talking about reforming America's huge entitlement programs, Social Security and Medicare. And his plan? It was a major, major departure from how things were being done. So before we dive into the nitty-gritty, we have to talk about this one key idea: means testing. What is it? Well, it's pretty simple, actually. The basic idea is that the more money you make, the fewer government benefits you get. So under Bush's plan, this meant that the wealthiest seniors would get smaller Social Security checks and wouldn't get as much help paying for Medicare. So his plan for Social Security basically had 3 big parts, and they were all about trying to keep the system solvent for the long haul. First, he wanted to gradually raise the full retirement age from 67 all the way up to 70. Second, as we just talked about, was to bring in means testing, which would lower the benefits for the highest earners. And third, he wanted to give older Americans an incentive to keep working by getting rid of the payroll tax for seniors who stayed on the job. Now, for Medicare, his big idea really came down to one word: choice. He wanted to let seniors choose from a whole menu of competing private insurance plans, or if they wanted, they could just stick with traditional Medicare. The idea was to bring some market competition into the system and create new, specialized plans for people with chronic conditions like diabetes or Alzheimer's. All right, we've gone through his record as governor, his specific policy plans. Let's pull it all together now and get a bird's-eye view of the entire Jeb Bush platform. This table really sums it all up nicely. For the economy, you've got that Vito Corleone focus on cutting spending, plus a really ambitious goal of 4% GDP growth. For education, he was for state-led Common Core standards and big on school choice and vouchers. On immigration, we saw that shift to supporting legal status but no citizenship. For Social Security, raise the retirement age to 70 and bring in means testing. And in foreign policy, a much more assertive, muscular American presence around the world. And all of this really leads us to one big, final question. For a candidate like Jeb Bush, his time as governor was his biggest strength, and you could argue sometimes his biggest weakness. It gave him this incredible depth of policy experience, for sure. But it also meant he was locked into positions that, by 2016, were sometimes out of sync with where the national primary voters were. It's this classic balancing act, you know? It's a challenge every governor faces when they decide they want to be president.